hoc, Nagog Hill Orchard ad hoc working group meeting for March 2nd, 2022. We're going to this evening recap our previous meeting. We're going to have group member and staff updates. That will be, we're going to get an orchard pruning update. We're going to review and discuss the RFP and the lease. We're going to review the action item calendar and then discuss next steps. So at our last meeting, which was quite lengthy, we went into detail about the proposed RFP and lease agreement that we will be bringing forward to the select board in the coming weeks. So there was an involved discussion about those documents. Since that time, these documents have been recirculated with some revisions based on the comments that town council Jenny Merrill received during that meeting. We also got received an update from Mr. Layden about pruning at the orchard and how that project was going. And is there anything else I missed, Joe, from our last meeting?
No, primarily most of the time had to deal with RFP and the lease information.
Right. So next on the agenda is group member staff updates. Joe, I'm going to start with you to see if you have an update about pruning.
Sure. So some of you may have noticed if you drove by the orchard today that the crew should be back. They told me they were going to be back. They had thought they had finished, but then when I went out to inspect the work, observed that they hadn't pruned all of the field 4. So reviewed where that delineation is. So they think it's going to take them about 4 days to do the remaining work. That, for just in case everyone wants to visualize it, brings it to about the shed that's close to Nagog Hill Road. That's essentially the end of Field 4. Okay. So they should be finishing it up over the next 4 days. They're gonna be there today, tomorrow, Friday, and on the weekend, so that on Monday they'll be all done.
Okay. And what are we doing with the cuttings?
So next week I'm meeting with Steve Whitten to go out there to just identify what the best way will be to handle it. Okay. I actually had gotten some feedback that it may be easier to push it all back and then to have a chipper come at that time to then chip some of the stuff that's pushed back. Okay. So I want to meet with Steve to sort of logistically go over what makes the most sense. Because while the ground's still frozen, it may be easier to get a piece of equipment to push it back. And then when things thaw out and dry out, then do some chipping. So beginning of the week, I'll meet him out there just to go over what would make the most sense.
Okay.
Can I just interject just real quick?
Sarah spoke to that last meeting. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, just as there's limited access, Joe, in some areas, and so if we can just be cautious that we can still get vehicles around.
Yep.
And then just to make sure that we're not stacking on those stone walls anymore as well.
Yeah.
So, I'm around if you need me to go out with you as well.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yep.
All right, cool. Thank you. Thanks. Anything else, Joe?
No, that's primarily it. On the to-do list is to get back in touch with people about spraying, but I want to make sure that the pruning was done and get a plan for the debris that's in between the trees before starting that.
Right. Excellent. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Glavey, do you have anything to share?
Nothing new. No.
Jen, do you have anything to share?
Nope. You and I went over some stuff, which I'm sure you'll review shortly. So yes. That was all.
Thank you. Sarah, do you have anything to share?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you. Will, do you have anything to share?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Cindy, just sorry, one more thing. It just occurred to me,
Sure.
Sort of another staff update. Amy Green, conservation agent, had gotten an email from the state. They do the annual sort of inspections for APR program. They had notified Amy that they weren't going to physically come out, but they wanted to arrange a phone call. I'm going to participate in that phone call just to address sort of like what we're doing and give them an update on the status, because last year one of the things that they were inquiring about was the status of lease and to make sure that we were moving things along. At that point, we were negotiating, so they were fine. Okay. But now with sort of the change, I was gonna pretty much be the point person for responding to them for that APR call and give them a status.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. So my update is that did follow up with Town Council, Joe Layden, Jen Clancy as well, and sort of went over the documents after our discussion at our last meeting. I was also in touch with Kathy Miller at the assessor's office, who provided some great information just regarding tax base for the buildings on the Orchard property as well as the land itself. And she came up with some numbers that I did share with the group just for conversation sake as we, begin to discuss the price proposal portion of the lease with the select board. I also received an email from Jay over at Land for Good, which provided some great insight with respect to the RFP, had some really good comments about that document that I did share with Town Council, and I did share with the group as well. So if you haven't had a chance to look through that, you might want to. It was some good points in there. And so that was it. So right now we are a little bit behind schedule as far as bringing the RFP and the our suggestions regarding the lease agreement to the select board. So we're scheduled to do that at the meeting. What meeting is that going to be, Joe? That's not.
No.
We talked about finalizing everything this meeting and then getting it on the agenda with the select board at another.
22nd, is that the date of it?
Whether or not the board wanted to request the 14th. I mean, concern about 28th is just then the calendar's starting to run long. And it may take a little bit of time to pull together all the documents for posting on the web and advertising and any of the lead time that we need for posting, because right, Jenny, this would end up being in the central register, so we end up being things need to be advertised, so any opening cannot occur until 30 days have elapsed. So once you look at that time frame, understand we have two select board members here, that the 14th is going to be a doozy of a meeting, but it's one of those things that I think if we're in shape, we should try to shoot for bringing this in front of the board for getting approval to advertise for that meeting.
Okay. We can talk about maybe adding just another special meeting to talk about it as well, just so that it gets the attention that it deserves. I don't want to be rushed when we go through this. The other thing I wanted to share was I did notify Ed Mullen, our building commissioner, about the buildings themselves. That was one of the comments that we had gotten from Jay at Land for Good as far as the barn. Is there electricity? Is there running water? Is there a wash and pack station? Is there a workshop bench, or what exactly is in those buildings that we might want to include as more detail in the RFP? Ed did share with me that he had sent some pictures over, I guess, a while back, Joe, to Anthony of the buildings. He had taken some pictures of the buildings.
I thought it was all exterior though.
Yeah, it is exterior.
Okay.
But so that was just one of the things that we had talked about maybe incorporating as well. But I did ask him to go back and get the answers to the questions as far as utilities and things like that go. And also I did follow up with Kathy at the assessor's office and asked her to provide the description of any descriptions that they have on file at the assessor's office with respect to those buildings. And she was going to look into that as well. So that brings us up to now going through the RFP. Got the pruning update. Yeah, so let's go through the RFP, the last version that I shared with the group. And I don't know, Joe, can you screen share that, or Jenny, or?
I can do that. I've got it open on my computer.
Okay.
And I have a couple comments on it.
Okay.
So we'll start with the.
Okay. So here we are, invitation to submit the response to the RFP. We've got the
Yep.
background information. The description of the property. I'm having trouble getting my head around this because I feel like when I look at, depending where I go for a description, I get a different variation.
Mhm.
Especially when you break down like the 48.67 APR, and all of that. So I'm
So-
struggling with that piece of the RFP.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
you could,
mean, here, I mean, we need to just, I mean, I think one of the problems is that by having that map, you sort of want to join those two, and that map doesn't doesn't match with the description of the property.
Right.
Because the parcel lines differ from those lines, and that map should go under the next the text on the next page.
Right.
I know that's, they should all stay together.
And are we putting together that overlay map that we talked about, Joe?
So what I can do is have like that a ortho map that then has the parcel data, so that that section that's highlighted is a little bit more straightforward and matches. The challenge is that the APR, those fields, they don't. It's not a layer that I have available. So we should really sort of try to reference that in a different fashion as far as identifying those fields, you know, the source being USDA, and just have that a little bit lower on that next page, just so that we don't sort of visually merge those things together.
Right. Can we highlight on this map itself somehow? Yeah, because this is referring to the assessor map parcels, but we're looking at the fields.
Right.
Right, and then the fields are identified below.
Yeah,
So,
But also, I
I'm-
see field 5 is missing.
right.
As far as I
See,
can-
right. I mean, because the solution might be if we can come up with the right description and then maybe just highlight those fields that are APR.
well, so my first thought is that the first section then is associated with a map generated by GIS that then just shows the parcels, and then we can say that orchard fields that are identified on the map produced by USDA, dated blah blah blah, include the following fields, and then go into that and
Okay.
separate them out. That may then give it a little bit better differentiation between what is really the property, because there's property that you know, is associated with the whole farm that's larger than what those fields are, and allows us to separate that out.
Joe, I think to Cindy's point, the way we had it before was so confusing. There was verbiage and then there was a picture and they didn't match. And I think for anybody looking at an RFP, they just want to know what they're going to be responsible for. And if we somehow just shade it accordingly, like, you know, the conservation land where they're not going to touch, they're not responsible for. Why are we highlighting that? We should just highlight what they're going to be responsible for.
Right.
And we had talked about an overlay. And if we go back to two different maps, I think it's just we'll be just as confused as always.
I mean, that's where I think we're going to have to use two maps, but I don't think it needs to be confusing. And I'm working on that. I just had two other RFPs and RFQs to get published this week. So this then will be the next thing, and I can sort of refine that a little bit more. But I don't have the USDA fields. I don't have that as any sort of GIS layer. So we'd either have to find someone to digitize it, to then input it in to do the overlay, or we just utilize two different graphics.
Okay. There's got to be a way though. Isn't there a way though to highlight it?
And we can highlight it or hatch it, but we can also ask the Light and Water Department that does a lot of maps for the town to do an overlay. But I agree with Jen that we should just hatch what's available or hatch out what is not available. So, and then we just have a key code for that.
Yeah, and as far as what we describe in the lease, and that I think is important to describe here, is just to differentiate between the property and then the premises, so that this might be all the Nagog Orchard property, but what we are getting in this lease are these fields.
Right.
And you can do that with the highlighting or something. I can work with
Right.
you to try and clarify that, and then refer to it consistently throughout, because that's a lot of my comments in here on this, is that it's still confusing. I don't even know if we need assessor's map parcels numbers in here. I mean, that's good information for the town to know, but the acreage is maybe important, and just knowing, and I also don't even know if it's important to know that it's an APR or a CR. Just know what's in the lease and what's not.
Right. Yeah, so maybe take out that whole, yeah, you're right. Like, as far as the assessor map parcels, who cares, right? But if we
care,
identify-
but they might not care.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. And I like Sarah, I mean, the Light and Water Department could very well help pull something together too.
Yeah.
So, that's a good suggestion. All right. So now we've got the vision.
Then we've got the vision, and I think it's largely unchanged, but we tried to, I'm not sure if we had these broken down quite into A, B, and C, and D before, but we tried to finesse this a little bit.
Right. And one of the things we did take out of that, it was redundant as far as engage with the community through regular community-oriented events. Indeed, there was a paragraph earlier, I think it might have been after A or in between A and B or something, that talked about being a, quote, community spokesperson. So we took that out because it's really just, people might want to be a spokesperson. That might turn people off. So we just left it at the language in D, engage the community through regular community-oriented events, and what that might mean. And then this representation paragraph too it was further down in the document. I just moved it up here because I thought it made more sense on page 3 as opposed to later in the document.
Yeah, I thought that was good. So then we've still got a little work to do on the existing conditions, but actually, I don't know how much. Oh yeah, because you received comments from farm.
Jen. From Jen Clancy?
Was it Jen? Oh, okay. I thought
Jen,
it was.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, to provide more description about the structures, which is a good idea.
Right. And then Jay from Land for Good as well had said that we should provide more detail about what exactly.
That's who I was thinking of. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're working on that.
And then I have had this highlighted because this is still referring to stuff. This right here is still referring to parts that we've revised once and are going to revise again. So.
Right.
But then we've added the home is excluded for now, but it's going to they'll have a first right of refusal. And so we're going to ask them to describe in their response how it would be used if and when it's available. And then the irrigation system, we changed that because it used to describe a well, which we're not sure if it's there.
Right.
So opportunities and expectations. Again, I've highlighted this because we need to, this is a question for you guys, actually. You put in here that you want some fields to be fruit bearing. These aren't the only fields that you're leasing, right? Are these just the ones that you want to remain fruit bearing and they can have more flexibility with other fields?
Right. I think we wanted to set some expectation, Jenny, that it is our hope that these fields regardless of whatever else happens with the property, will remain fruit bearing. And we base that on the present condition of those fields. But we just wanted to set that expectation because, you know, there's certainly a lot of other space on the property that might be used for other purposes, but
In the visual quotient to it too, right? This is what people are used to seeing, and we want to kind of protect some of that.
right.
Yeah, I don't know that that provision right there needs to be changed. I think once we more clearly identify what's included in the lease, then it's more obvious that, you know, that we're not, I was confused when I looked at this to see, is this everything in the lease, or are you just discussing a portion of the lease here? So that
I
helps.
think we had also mentioned that we wanted to have it as it's what we prefer, but we have to take into account if there's droughts or something happens to the field. So I like this wording to the best of their ability, that it's not compulsory.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, and I think we addressed that elsewhere too, that concern. So then in objectives, now we're saying our intent is to execute one or more leases for up to 20-year terms. This is so that we can have the flexibility to maybe lease the building, the house, if we get that in shape soon enough. And what we've done here and in the lease is I've broken down two different types of uses. And this is is important for their proposal because there's a list of uses that you want them to do on here. Then we're calling those the required uses. But then the permitted uses are really, you tell us what you want to do with the rest of it, you know, or in addition to it. And so, you know, I sort of see the lease as they're going to the best of their ability, maintain this as a fruit orchard, have some educational opportunities, do pick your own, operate the farm stand. That's all required. But then you won't know what's permitted until you've received proposals, because you're looking for them to tell you what their exciting vision is for the orchard. So we're trying to make that clear. This was largely in your RFP before, but now it's more explicitly, this is required. And then we say, also, please describe what you intend to do if you're awarded the orchard. And then we give them some examples like wholesale activities. Oops, that's spelled wrong. Educational programs, yeah, functions or gatherings. You know, these aren't required, but they're, you know, we're letting them know that we're open to these ideas. And so then in the submission of proposals, you still got your non-price and price proposal. But as I was looking at the RFP, I think this was discussed before, and then it was really sort of resonated with me more as I was going through it, that the whole discussion of the comparative evaluation criteria, which before you had in your Form A, really just belongs in the body of this RFP and not in the proposal form, because all you're doing is letting them know that once they've met the minimum criteria, you're going to then evaluate their proposal based on these criteria. So this is to make it easier for them to respond. So we've got the description of what's going to happen. They'll first evaluate the non-price proposals, then those that meet the minimum criteria will be evaluated by the comparative criteria. And then you already have, this was actually in there. You did have your rule for award, which is your standard rule for award. And so then I launch into the comparative criteria, which I've cut a lot of with your comparative criteria before by putting it in your proposal form. You ask for things again that you had already asked for. So instead, I've just said, we're going to evaluate your proposal based on these criteria. So, and one other thing I did was we moved provide your education to your minimum criteria, because you weren't going to evaluate that. You just wanted that information.
On the equipment, Jenny, can we stop for 1 second?
Yeah.
We had some conversation about that, and maybe it was
There it is.
Land for Good, the comment from Jay, thought that the equipment piece of it was too specific. Because there's so many pieces of equipment that can come with this type of operation. They had thought that maybe we were limiting ourselves. And I thought we had talked about that as far as tractor, pesticide sprayer, like, does anyone remember us having that conversation?
I think we do. I think, and I agree that it is very specific to an orchard versus someone who has other type of means for agriculture. If there is a way to maybe just make this a narrative versus a criteria.
Right. I thought we had talked at one point about just saying to them, please provide us with a list of equipment that you would utilize for the operation of the orchard. Is that somewhere else, Jenny?
No, it's right here. You and me and Joe talked about that, and we did change this to say equipment owned or leased that would be utilized in farm.
So
One
of the things that I think, because we did discuss that, was rather than listing out in those bullet points like that, basically identifying that they have like no understanding or poorly demonstrated equipment that would be needed for the operation, have identified some, which then some equipment that would be needed, have like experience, and then advance that they fully identified all of the equipment and tools that would be necessary for the operation of the orchard. Sort of doing it qualitative,
right,
in that manner, based on the information they needed to submit.
Right.
Yeah, you're right, Joe. So we need
I
to.
would also defer to Will, though. As a farmer, this is where I think Will can offer his expertise if it is too narrowly defined.
Yeah.
And that's where, Sarah, and Will, one of the thoughts we had in the conversation was, and Will should be able to identify, like, based on what they submit as far as what equipment they have, think, or would bring into the operation, Will may be able to say, this person just doesn't have an idea what's going to be necessary. Or, yep, they have a really holistic view of what would be necessary, and gives us some level of confidence. I don't think we really wanted to say, well, we envisioned 10 pieces of equipment, they got 7 out of the 10, and we're going to grade it on that. We want to get an idea, do they have a full understanding of what is going to be necessary as they submit their narrative?
Right. So, yeah, and we did. We talked about rewording that.
Yeah.
Will, are you there?
I would tend to think that based on how they fill out the rest of it, you would have an idea of whether or not they have a grasp of the whole concept. The specific pieces of equipment are important, but if they decided to have, custom spraying done, or they hired out all the pruning, they hired out all the harvesting or something like that, it depends a little bit on the plan as far as the completeness, how complete the list needs to be. So we would be able to judge that, based on what their grand scheme of things is. And it would be easy enough to talk to, UMass or another local orchardist and find out, what are the basic pieces of equipment. Sure, I can rattle off a few pieces, but it might be better to talk to, Frank Carlson or Sean O'Neill or, UMass and get a equipment list, and then see how that fits what their proposal is.
Okay. So so make it more specific, Will, as opposed to leaving it open-ended?
I think you can leave it open-ended and see what their proposal is, and then have a conversation.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So yeah, and that's what Jay Silverman had suggested too, was not to limit ourselves by listing out specific equipment. So how can we work? We got to reword that.
Could you say like no equipment, minimal equipment, and full array of equipment? Something like that. That's very open-ended.
We need 4. No equipment, minimal equipment. Average amount of equipment.
They'd have to have a concept of the list of equipment that they would need. Then of the pieces of equipment they list, which ones do they have currently? What are they planning to get? And then if they have all of the pieces of equipment that they're intending to use, so that's 3. And then it would have to be, if they have approved financing for X piece of equipment. If they didn't have all the pieces but had financing approved or purchase order or something.
Okay.
I mean, I don't, just to kind of throw it out there. I mean, I know it's like hard to evaluate, but I don't know what anyone thinks about the idea of just like of not doing this criteria too, and having them write a narrative about their equipment and their approach. To Will's point, they might hire out the spraying or they might hire out the picking. A narrative might be like a detailed question that provokes
I
a
agree,
written
Amy.
response.
Yeah. I agree, because I think that we're going to isolate ourselves with this criteria. I'm much more curious what they are going to bring to the table.
Right.
And that's why I was trying to say that the criteria can be about their understanding of what is going to be necessary and their ability to provide access to what is necessary.
Right. And that's part of the criteria for the non-price proposal too. We do say in one of the paragraphs there, we asked them to describe, to include equipment.
Yeah.
Right
and I
there,
know,
F. It's on F.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's already in there.
Well, again, everything's in the minimum criteria because then you evaluate, these are the things you
There we
want.
go to evaluate. I got you. So that's
Yeah.
like,
But what I was just going to say is, what if you instead, because it sounds like you are going to compare use this as a way of comparing proposals. What if instead of you asking them for a list of the equipment, you ask them for a plan to provide the equipment needed?
okay.
Because, and then it could, then you could go evaluate that more based on what some of the criteria Will was describing, because, Will was describing, basically plans, like either I've got all the equipment, or I'm going to get all the equipment, or I'm going to get them this way through a lease, or I'm going to obtain financing and buy it. And we might not even need to get that specific. I could try and pull some more general language, like
Yeah, maybe we could just say,
budget,
Hmm?
an equipment budget.
Yeah.
As far as the actual physical pieces, and a broad question of what they expect to have to spend for necessary equipment. I mean, if somebody comes in and says, "Oh, I think I could do it for 10,000," and the reality is it's 120, then that's going to raise some more questions and give us some places to go on the evaluation.
I like that. Equipment
yeah, and I
budget.
think, and I don't know if there's been any forward motion on it, but I know we had talked about potentially either asking someone, who was an orchardist, or paying someone who's an orchardist to help the Board of Select, really go through and understand these proposals in a much deeper way than, we can, obviously not being orchardists. Because I think this is sort of like where the crux of the issue is, like where we want to try to pull out some information that says, we've got the equipment that's needed to execute the plan, the vision that this particular orchard has, right? And every vision is going to be really different. And every vision is going to require different assets to like make it happen. And so this is where I feel like having some expertise to come in and who can kind of look at all the proposals and say, okay, this person's vision is fine. And yes, they have all the assets needed to execute it. And this person's vision is also great. They do not have the assets to pull this off. And I think that's a level of insight that the Board of Select, respectfully just doesn't have, not being farmers. And I think you're trying to pull something that I think is going to be really hard to pull because every vision is going to be really different.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, certainly I know that Will would be able to help us. And I think if we ever got to a point where we were that uncertain, we could certainly rely on other resources. Like you mentioned, Amy, to assist us with the decision process. I think until we see what we get, it's kind of hard to make that determination, but definitely leave it open as a possibility if we needed to rely on somebody to assist us with the decision-making process, we would do that. And I certainly hope that this group too will be, on hand as well to provide their input.
Can I make one suggestion based on Amy's comments of the title of this this section where it says comparative evaluation criteria? Can we also add the word and vision? So that way it gives us the latitude that if you want to have just an open question, you can do that. So comparative evaluation criteria and vision. So I think it will give you a little bit more leeway if you choose to change number 2.
I think we'd want to put that into how we evaluate underneath, specifically in criteria 2, if we were to include a vision as it related to the utilizing farming.
Yep. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to put, I've moved on to written notes on this criteria, so I'm going to add that.
Madam Chair, I just make
Certainly.
a specific observation to this point, but also a general observation. I think the language is fine as is. It's good to ask for it, but we shouldn't be agonizing over these details here. At the end of the day, check all the boxes here appropriately. That'll inform what we expect from them in the RFP response, and it'll be guidelines toward the criteria will be guidelines toward a selection. But in all reality, who gets picked is going to be probably a determination based on some bigger picture considerations about their experience, the comfort level, their financing, that sort of stuff, their vision for the property, and the little details are nice, but that's not likely how we're going to make a selection here. And everything you said about getting information and input from all of these, this group and every other outfit that's going to help the town, that all has merit. But I think rather than agonizing here, I'd rather be giving close consideration to the actual responses we get and taking a look at the candidates we get.
Right. I mean, I appreciate that, Paul, certainly. I did like Will's suggestion, though, as far as what is your equipment purchase and management plan, just to see if they have such a thing. So, but I know what you're saying as far as belaboring ourselves over this paragraph. So we can come up with something for this.
I mean, I don't mind if it's as simple as adding what Will just suggested. That's something that's not here and that's added value. I get that. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll work on this section. Jenny, you taking notes?
Yes, and maybe Will, can I reach out to you for comment on this section?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. So let's move on.
So
I'm going to step off. I am double booked this evening. hopefully that's all right. I had another meeting that came in after we scheduled this one.
That's not a problem, Will. Thank
We'll
you.
send you the link for the video once it's online so you can watch the rest.
Okay, thanks.
And
Have a
it
good
quits to
evening.
follow.
Okay, so I'm going to move on. I think the rest of this is pretty much in there, except I deleted the educational part because we put that. So now we've got here, this is Form A, your new non-price proposal, where what I basically did here was I took any of the additional things that you previously had in the comparative criteria, but didn't have listed as, part of what you wanted in the proposal. I made sure to include in here, and anything that didn't have some sort of evaluation criteria, I also moved into here. And then it was getting long enough that I decided to break it up by these different bullets, so that it's easier to know that it's easier for them to know they've responded to everything. So we're now asking them for a narrative describing their agricultural business and the products marketed and number of employees, their experience managing fruit orchards, how they intend to use your orchard. This, I think, will maybe change based on where we land with the comparative criteria, but something to do with equipment. You've got your pesticides, and then educational background is new, and then their involvement with the community through the CSA boxes, pick your own. We got rid of the requirement to show insurance because that's really just a requirement once they get the lease. They don't need to have insurance to respond. We asked them for a preliminary management plan, which we say is going to be, this is off, the numbering's off a little bit, we'll have to fix that, which will be turned into a formal management plan during lease negotiations. And then we also pared down what is required in the management plan. So we've gotten rid of anything about capital improvements to the structures or requiring them to tell us what they would do with the structures, but we still have we still ask them to give us a description of minor routine maintenance activities they intend to perform. And then we also say the plan and outline form that covers these topics is sufficient.
Okay.
Any comments on that before I move on?
No.
Okay.
All right.
And so then I've created a price proposal form because I realized you didn't have one. And we're also now asking for a little bit more information. But I think, Cindy, are we going to be amending this? You wanted to just tell them what the lease.
Right. And honestly, Jenny, I think that's something when we bring it before the select board to have a conversation with them about how do we want to approach this?
Yeah. So the first option I had thought of was, and you'll see it reflected in the lease, was to set up by saying, well, first there's a lease payment that's just in connection with those required uses of the property. And then you might want to have them offer a lease payment connected with the permitted uses, because that's directly related to what they want to do with the property. And some activities might be more lucrative than others, so if this ends up being, some venue for parties or something, and they're making a lot of money, you don't want to be basically giving somebody very inexpensive land in exchange for them to be making a profit like that.
Right.
And then also propose an annual lease payment for the residential home if and when it becomes available.
Right. And one of the other things, and I don't know if it's in this document or if it's in the lease agreement, that I want to talk to the board about specifically is maybe waiving the lease payment for the first year. For anybody that comes on board, just to give them time to get situated and get up and running. But that's something that needs to be discussed and decided on by the board.
Okay.
I can't remember if I put it in here, if it was maybe in the lease agreement.
I don't think it's in here. So this is the end of
Okay.
this document.
Okay. All right. Any questions or comments on that from anybody?
Yeah, good work.
Thanks.
I guess I have a comment. And through this whole process, we've been working on this for months. And I come down to the same thing. Actually, Jenny just touched on the subject. What is the intention of the town with this property? Is the intention to keep this ag land in pristine? And if so, I guess my thought is, so what if somebody who's there makes money? As long as they keep that orchard the way the town wants it to, I think if we start micromanaging and just, that's a bad word. I just keep coming back to, if somebody takes on this orchard and it looks beautiful and it's run and they come up with an idea to make a lot of money, good for them. And I'm getting conflicting messages, like, are we trying to make money off of this orchard, or are we just trying to keep it as a beautiful piece of property that Littleton can be proud of?
Right. And that's a really good point, Jen. I mean, I think there's a balance there. And I totally agree with you. If we get somebody that comes on board that's a great tenant and they do everything that we want them to do, we hope that they'll do with the property, and they maintain it and it's beautiful and it's fruitful, and they're a good partner with the community, certainly we want to welcome that. But on the other hand, it costs money to maintain the orchard.
I'm not saying they should be there for free, but I'm just saying, it's tough. If you penalize someone for doing well, you're gonna want more money. And
it's not penalizing them. I guess the way I'm looking at it is, there's only so much money that we can charge them based upon, if you look at the figures that Kathy Miller came up with, like the bottom line number, right?
Yep.
So say it's $2,000 a month.
Yep.
Right. And that's just based on bare minimum operating the orchard, apple picking and all of that stuff. But if there's other activities that are going on there that are very profitable, that then would help the town maintain the houses, maintain the barns, maintain fences and things like that, that otherwise are going to cost us money. I think we need to take that into consideration when we kind of think about the bigger picture of it.
And let's not lose sight of the fact of what this piece of our RFP is doing here. It's asking them to make a proposal to us.
Right.
So it's, it's not like we're demanding of them a set number or a percentage. It's like, along these guidelines, you tell us how you intend to run this thing and what you propose to pay us and how, right? I mean,
I'm just worried if 5 years from now, somebody has a very successful business and we come back and say, well, we want a piece of that. So that's why this wording under B is so important with this, how they're going to propose, what to your point, Paul, how they're going to, what they're going to do and what they want to pay us. I just want everyone to be cognizant of, what is the purpose of this property.
Right.
That's all.
It's a good point, Jen. I think we have to find a balance, though. And to Paul's point for B, that we're going to ask them to provide us with that information. But it's a point well taken.
And just to Jen Clem,
the philosophy you described there, Jen, was exactly the arrangement we had with Charles for the longest time, and for the longest time it worked. I mean, our primary concern and conditions of change out there was there were very few options for keeping it viable, and if he delivered on that, we weren't really concerned about the revenue end of it. which worked until it didn't. And then when it didn't, either we were finding out they were making a lot of money or making money on side uses we didn't know about, and then it got ugly. So I think there's a learn from experience reason to have a detailed financial arrangement, but I think it's also just as appropriate to be asking it of them to say, hey, you tell us how you intend to do this. And, and then it's negotiable from that point.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think, and I hear everyone's like valid concerns. I just think if we should just be careful of that percentage, because if it's really high, what you're going to end up driving them to do is do things that are non-agriculture related, because it's very hard to make money in agriculture. And especially initially there's going to be a lot of sweat equity put in before they start seeing any profit. And if we were asking too much of a percentage, you're going to drive them towards opening up a brewery. You're going to drive them towards having weddings, like things that are huge money makers.
Yeah.
But we're not asking for any percentages. We're asking them to tell us.
Let me ask also, because this is, I think, why we're sort of going around this. Any improvements that are done need to follow 30B. The lease identifies we have some responsibilities. Having some sort of base lease that sort of puts it on par with some of the other farms in town, that's a question as far as fairness. Would it be possible that then anything above that gets directed into, say, capital improvement stabilization fund for improvements at the orchard, so that if we have to repair a roof, we're not going to CPC for it. It's coming out of proceeds that are coming out of the orchard. Right. You could sort of think about it that way, so that, because with Charles, it was like, okay, we're going to give you a reduction if you put it back into the orchard. But without having reporting to see that's being done, or whether it's being done appropriately, we're faced with boilers that are, I don't know how they got those started again, but they definitely need to be replaced. Maintenance that really was deferred and wasn't done. It may be a way of sort of achieving both some level of equity with the other farms in town, but also not then putting the burden of capital improvements onto the town by saying, well, these people are living here for free, and we're now have $100,000 request for capital improvements at the orchard.
Right.
So there might be a couple ways we can structure this to basically make sure that any future criticism is avoided as well.
Right. Thanks, Joe. Are there any other comments on this? Okay. Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so next we have the lease.
Okay. Oh my gosh, how many did open? All right, let's see if I can share this. Where'd it go? Where did you guys go? There we go. Okay. So the lease has been largely cleaned up. Trying to think of what.
Looking through my notes here.
As you're scrolling down, may I ask a quick question on section B, the reasonable notice of 48 hours? Is that standard? I guess I can see if something's wrong to get in within 48 hours, but an actual inspection of something, I'm just concerned that if someone gets notice on a Friday, but I'm just curious where we came up to 48 hours.
Oh, under reserved rights, Sarah, B1?
Correct, yep, B. Yep.
All right, in front of us.
I'm just curious if council, if 48 hours is standard.
I mean, it is fairly standard, but it's not a hard, fast rule. We just really want to reserve the right to get in there because.
Sure, no, and I can appreciate if something's going wrong, but I guess if something's just kind of like an annual or something, we're not just gonna throw 48 hours on them.
Yeah, no, I think an annual, you'd want to have more time than that for sure. In
Okay,
fact, I think that's part of the plan, the management plan, is you'd put in there
okay, great.
basically when that's going to happen.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got the lease premises. We're still working on that description. That will come from what we do with the RFP. We got our reserved rights, which I think all of this is pretty much unchanged. So the uses section has been changed again to reflect this new concept of required uses and permitted uses. So, this is what we want them to do, required uses. I've added this bit: in the event that forces of nature prevent performance or require a change, they'll provide the town with notice of the circumstances and they'll negotiate an amendment to the lease and the plan in a way that keeps it in land and agricultural use and in compliance with the APR.
Okay.
I think that's really helpful, and I admire the changing in the language of permitted versus required.
Yeah. Oh, well, so then the permitted uses, this one is very open-ended because, again, this is just the boilerplate there so that they can see what will be in the lease, but the permitted uses are going to be decided after you guys evaluate proposals and figure out which proposal's best and what uses you want to allow from that proposal. So what I'm envisioning is those permitted uses will be introduced in an exhibit. And I have no idea what it might be. It's going to vary based on whatever people propose. But basically that's just anything else they want to do with the orchard that's not already required. So then we've got, there's a requirement for public access. And then we have some comments on this provision, Cindy, that we were going to discuss,
Right.
because it still says those commercial uses directly connected to cultivation maintenance. And you're wondering if we can just refer to the permitted uses and required uses, which we could. Just to be clear, though, that the commercial language was put in here in an effort to avoid creating a residential lease again. But
Right.
if we are okay with a residential lease, you can open it. I mean, this is also something that can be negotiated later. It's in here to put them on notice that that's what you want, but
Right.
You're not bound to it.
Okay.
So
To those commercial uses directly connected to. Okay.
so then,
You don't think that's contradictory at all, or has the potential to be contradictory between the permitted?
well, it does.
Required
And
and
it's something
permitted
that would need to
uses?
be changed. If they present you with
Right.
a proposal to have people live there, which, I mean, you can't right now. I don't think there's any.
Yeah, so this is all right. It's
Yeah.
subject to change anyways. Okay,
Right.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
So I thought I accepted these. Okay, so the legal requirements, I thought I accepted these, so it's gonna get whittled down a little bit, but we're now referring to all the laws and ordinances and permits that they have to comply with. And I've included in another exhibit provisions regarding alcohol, because if we're going to want to contemplate allowing some sort of events with alcohol there, then that needs to be examined, and we should discuss this with the select board too, because you'll see in exhibit E that there's some more provisions in there than is only required by law.
Okay.
And we can just talk about how much what you want to allow. I mean, you could allow just parties with drinking, you could also allow some sort of brewery operation there,
Okay,
So, but if you do want to explore that and be open to that, then there's other things like we'll need to investigate the insurance provision and.
oh, with Maya and everything. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So rent has been changed again. This is just very boilerplate and generic and is subject to change based on what the select board wants and what we see in proposals. But it's just another way of trying to capture, the rent that's just connected with the permitted uses versus the rent that maybe would be connected with the permitted uses, the required
Right.
uses versus the permitted uses. And then additional rent is basically additional expenses in connection with enforcing the lease or in the permitted uses or anything else where they're supposed to pay you because of an event of default or something.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you asked me, Cindy, about a force majeure clause. I usually advise against force majeure clauses, but we can, especially when the only obligation is to pay money.
Okay.
But it's open to discussion. We do have the option of amending the lease if there's a problem, if there's a force majeure event.
Right. And do we say that somewhere else in the lease agreement, or was that?
I mean, that was in connection with their.
On it in the RFP, but.
Yeah, no, that wasn't up here in connection with their requirement to use it for orchard purposes, that we're going to end the lease if there's.
Right.
But that's just one type of force majeure event.
Right.
Force majeure clause usually encompasses, everything from war to now pandemics and.
Right.
And the like.
Okay.
This has been streamlined a bit. We took out some of the legalese in here. And I also streamlined this to try and make it a little more clear. Just that we intend this to be a lease and not subject to bidding laws. But if it is subject to bidding laws, then lessee will immediately alter its business to ensure compliance.
And then the maintenance and repairs.
Yeah, so then I've tweaked the capital improvement piece. So rather than saying outright they can't do substantial capital improvements, now they can't do it without written permission of the town. And I add in here that if the town does authorize a lessee sponsored capital improvement project, they have to comply with all laws, including those bidding laws. To the extent required by law, because they might not have to do anything. It just depends on the project and the circumstances, all of the circumstances.
Okay. And then we added paragraph C with the grants.
Yeah, we added, they can apply for and execute grant agreements with prior approval of the town. This is largely unchanged, I think. The environmental section I've now added in our Exhibit E, which has a list of some laws and terms. I've moved the definition of environmental laws and hazardous materials to that exhibit and tried to streamline this a little bit to just be a little less wordy, but it's still the same concept. They can't discharge hazardous materials or or violate environmental laws, and they need to notify us if they do. And then they need to indemnify us if there's a release. So then in education, public education, I have added another thing. This is, again, Exhibit D is going to be their list of permitted uses, which will come from their proposal and whatever you've accepted from their proposal. So I've just said they can also use it for other educational uses as described in Exhibit D. And if they haven't proposed any, we can just eliminate this provision, but it's there, you know, in case you get somebody with one of those nice programs that you guys described before.
And that insurance language is just standard.
Yeah. I put the comment on here just about if you want to contemplate permitting consumption of alcohol or even a brewery, we should find out if Maya recommends anything else.
Okay.
I mean, there's obviously, to comply with a one-day liquor license, you have to meet certain, you know, insurance requirements, but it just might be an added requirement that we want to remember. I don't know that we need to put it in here right now. You know, it's just something to think about.
Okay.
This, we didn't change too much.
To business operations.
Business operations from farm operations. I thought that was a good change, Cindy. These two, I added in response to your comment. Provide a copy of the plan to be kept on file with the town administrator's office. That's good. Annually. What is happening? Okay. Another thing to file annually. These are largely unchanged. I think most of the rest of this is pretty much as we had described before.
Right.
Remedies. I put in the dispute resolution provision, which, as I told Cindy, it's pretty brief because the remedies for default are pretty lengthy already. And then these are what the exhibits will be, except we're going to have to change Exhibit A.
Right.
Clearly. Exhibit B is we're still working on that. The management plan, this is just a placeholder because we obviously don't have one yet. And so is D, schedule of permitted uses and intensity of uses. So this, what I would envision is, you get their description of what they want to do with the property, and you might put them in there. But if there's some things like again, say they want to use them for events or something, you might want to limit that so that it's not rented out every Saturday of the year, right?
Right. Should we put in there to be provided by respondent, or I guess,
or just to be determined or something, because it's going to be a negotiation. Yeah.
Subject to negotiation, or okay. On C and D, right?
Yeah, and then E, this one is here. This is where I've got the provision I've got the environmental laws and the hazardous materials provisions. Okay. And then this is the provisions regarding alcohol. I don't know that anyone here really cares too much about this, but the select board probably will. Mm-hmm. And so, again, here I've got here, if lessee obtains a farmer brewery, farmer winery, farmer distillery license from the ABCC, they can also apply for liquor license. I mean, this is a lot of just there's a lot of this, frankly, is redundant information.
Supposing we have that. That's language that we may put in there if they're looking for that, Kenny. Because I hate to be putting that out there, and it's almost like we're inviting that,
Yeah, we could do that too. We could leave it out and just have it as a provision if they ask for that.
I'm glad the work is done.
Yeah,
but I don't want to be. If you put that out there, people see that's. If they weren't considering it, you're going to get people who are going to be applying for this primarily with the agriculture as a secondary consideration.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point, Paul.
We may be getting that anyway, I just hate to be encouraging the uncomfortable situation where we're going to get a bunch of brew house / orchards,
So would you like me to just, I mean, I could just put here provisions regarding alcohol and then just write to be determined, just so that they know that there's something coming. I think,
Or could we put if applicable?
yep, or yeah, to be determined if applicable.
There you go.
Sure.
Yeah,
And then we just know that this is, we can work on the provision itself with you guys. Because like I said, a lot of this is just what the law is, but I don't think that everybody, somebody in farming business who on the side is going to have a party necessarily knows about a one-day liquor license and how many times they can apply for one and when they need a caterer and when they don't, and what they can serve and what they can't. So I think it's important to put that in there, even though it's most of it's just the law. Okay.
right. And that's something, if they did come before the select board to apply for a one-day liquor license, would be provided to them anyways at that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
As part of that process. But to Paul's point, yeah, maybe we just take it out and just say,
Yeah. But what kind of this is a message we're sending to people about our interests. You include this much language about this topic, it's almost as if that's what we're expecting
It's true.
or inviting.
Yep. Okay,
Okay.
I can make that change, and then I'll just put the provision in my folder for future reference.
right. Yeah,
Yep. And that's it.
all right. Any questions or comments from anybody
No, good, very thorough.
about that? Okay, it looks good. Thanks, Jenny, for your work on that,
You're welcome.
and everybody for providing your input and comments. Okay, good. So I think we'll make those changes. I think the big thing is narrowing down, firming up the map and the visual about the property itself, and getting this ready to go before the select board. I think, and Paul, maybe you can provide some input on this too. I think maybe, and I hate to say it, adding a separate meeting to discuss this. I don't want to cram it in when we've already got a full agenda. What do you think?
If we need to, we'll do it.
Okay.
What is it? Oh, that we've got I've lost, I can't remember what we've got on the 14th that's dominating that meeting.
We have, pretty much we're going to be going through the 25 articles to vote it on the warrant. We have 9 Air Road slated to come in for that evening. We have here, I believe we have a liquor
9 Air
license
Road
hearing.
slated to come in for what? I mean, the enforcement action? Are we having an executive session on it or what?
It would be to get an update from them on compliance with the earth removal permit, and what their plans are to rectify and come in compliance.
I guess I would imagine that should just be handled by the land use department. I mean, isn't that an enforcement issue at this point?
No, it's our permit. So it would be through the select board in our office. And there was commitments they made in public as part of their application that weren't part of the decision that we need to basically have them reaffirm their commitments to the residents. So.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the typical administrative department requests, but primarily it's going to be town meeting stuff because next Tuesday on the 8th, that's when we're going to be having our joint FinCom and select board meeting to finalize budget and capital budget.
Yeah. But going through we've already seen most of the articles, right? I mean,
it's seen most of, but without any dollar figures. So, hopefully after we come out of Tuesday night, we'll be able to finalize so that it's not hard on the 14th. That's our expectation.
Neither is the 14th final time we're going to look at those, right?
The warrant will close on the 18th.
It will. Okay, so that would be our last look at them. All right. Well, I don't know if I would think we could put it on the agenda, but if you want to do another meeting, that's fine. We'll do that too.
Okay. Well,
tomorrow when I'm in the office, what I'll do is we were starting to pull together a draft agenda for that meeting, and that way I can sort of communicate with you, Cindy, as far as what we sort of envisioned, like if it's reviewing the document, we'd of course want to have the board have it in advance time
Right.
to review. If we're just thinking that it would be 20 to 30 minutes, that may be something we'd be able to program in.
Okay. I think if it's the sooner we can get it to the board, the better.
Right.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can, depending on, I mean, we have, I think, done a really good job, just saying, getting this together. So hopefully it won't be more than a half-hour discussion. Maybe we can put it on first thing,
Yeah.
because I'd like this group to be there. So let's do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to clarify the process, so, I know we're gonna like sort of clean up from the discussion today, and it goes to the Board of Select. And if they're happy with it, can it then be made public at that point? And what's the process in getting this out the door at this point?
What is
So-
that process, Joe?
So if before that meeting, I'd be working with Jenny. I mean, pretty much the things that we have left, I think are extremely doable. I don't know if it really necessitates us pulling together another meeting. If we, meet jointly, we can clarify the description of the property and all those things. I think pretty well in the meantime. Let's say the select board votes to allow for us to advertise the RFP. I then would be not only pulling together legal ads, putting in the registry of deeds and all that, and identifying then when it would be available. Typically wait until and you submit on a Thursday for a publication that following Wednesday in the Central Register, and that would then identify like sort of when that go live date is. We'd have all the bids. We'd have to have it open for no less than 30 days. And, I think it basically depends on whether or not the select board see any changes that we'd want. Like some of those things, Jenny, if the select board primarily had comments in the lease, would it be out of the realm of possibility to still publish, put out a draft lease, and then put together an addendum if we needed to take an extra meeting to make some fine tuning of the draft lease agreement?
Sure.
So I think part of it depends on what kind of feedback and what's the thoughts of the board as well. And if we're struggling along those rent things and that's captured in the lease, we could probably still get it out on the street and then file an addendum to make sure that we then nail down that language rather than waiting a couple more weeks.
Yeah, so theoretically, if that sort of like played out like that, we wouldn't have to have another meeting like this, per se.
Oh, you don't like my contract world.
I think you're wonderful. I do.
Notice she said that it was about you. The contract, that may be a different question.
Yeah, I've we have to talk about like spraying and who's gonna pick the apples and just like stuff like that, just in terms of just like keeping the eye on the other balls that we have to juggle in the air.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, once that gets out there, our work is far from done, so.
Right.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. We'll shoot for the 14th then.
I'll have it on my calendar.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Just from driving by the orchard, it looks like they've completed all the pruning. It looks like you can throw cats through all the trees now, as you like to say.
The cat talk?
I think I did my staff report before you jumped on, Amy. They didn't do all of Field 4 that we had sort of contracted them for, so they should have been back today to do another, probably remaining around 500 trees. But they should be wrapped up by the time the weekend's over.
Sounds great.
All right, good. All right, good. So we've got our action item calendar to talk about. So we've got We're gonna go to the select board on the 14th. Joe, you're gonna meet with, highway about getting rid of the
Yep.
cuttings, right?
Yep.
And then we just gotta keep spraying
Oh,
on
one
our
of the things,
radar.
also for everyone's on the radar, I've asked PNBC, Brian Force, and some others. We talked, and this was a couple meetings ago, about whether or not we need to have any money for a feasibility study for looking at the buildings to identify what we might need to put together for
For the house.
an improvement plan, not only for the house, but if there was something wrong with the other structures.
Okay,
So does that sound like something that definitely want to squeeze in as we're finishing up budget cycle to try to get some funds for that, or recommend to the select board that they include some funding to allow for that to happen?
right. What is the thoughts of the group on that to make a recommendation to the board?
Yeah, I think upgrading the house and the barn and fixing stuff is absolutely a priority.
Right.
It can't be crumbling down around them.
So this would be for money for what, we're gonna call it a feasibility study, Joe, just to make an
Yeah.
assessment.
Because we have to have assessment done of the heating system, anything that deals with the house. But there may be some things that we need to take a look at the other buildings, make sure that there's not a problem with the refrigeration and the cooling in the cold storage. Power hasn't been on for the last couple of months, or it's on the site, but the equipment hasn't been used. So we don't necessarily know, maybe what some of the condition is, and it may be helpful to have that flexibility to do that assessment. Otherwise, we could find ourselves, July, that we're asking for a reserve fund transfer because we find that we need to. But since we're finalizing the budget process, if we can build something in, it might be better to have something at least on the books to allow for that work to happen.
May I ask a quick question? Is it not feasible to have our code enforcers, our wiring inspectors, all those inspectors at least do a cursory look at some of these things? I just feel as though I want to not keep spending money on a lot of these items. Yeah, so I mean, if we have that, and I also feel as though the person that's coming in, we can't make, having had a business that did not open for a year, I knew firsthand what things were not going to work. Even though you turned them back on, they needed to be cycled all year. So I don't know that we want to be in the business of buying more refrigeration units as well. So it's, at some point there's as is, but the clock just keeps ticking.
Right. So I thought, I mean, at one point I did ask Mr. Mullen to go in and give an assessment to the best of his ability. I mean, certainly we could have a wiring inspector go in, we could have a plumbing inspector go in. Yeah, we could do that, but then there's also the structural component, as far as the house and the buildings go too, that we need to get a handle on.
Is it still our understanding that you can't access the house yet? Do we have access to the barn yet?
Right.
Yes, we have access to the barn. I understand what you're saying. I mean, just by having money to allow for a feasibility doesn't mean we have to spend it.
Okay.
If we can get that work done through staff, I agree that not only can we do it faster, but cheaper. And then if all of a sudden it means that we just have to turn that back and not use it, great. But I always get concerned if all of a sudden we find that we can't do it or we need something else, then how are we dealing with it?
Right. Right. And it is the time now to ask.
Yeah.
While we're working on the budget.
So I don't know if Mr. Mullen, it sounds like Mr. Mullen has already been through there. I don't know if I can ask what his,
He didn't. he just went out and took pictures. He hasn't done a full scope. And his response to me was, well, give me a scope of work. What exactly are you looking for? And I don't know that. I don't think any of us are equipped to tell him what to look for. So that would be the reason for a feasibility study. So I like the idea of having the flexibility. If we can get staff to do some of the work, to Sarah's point, I think we should certainly utilize them for that purpose. But I want to have all our bases covered and have somebody available. I think we are going to need somebody, especially when the house becomes available, to really go in there and give us a comprehensive report on what work needs to be done to that
Right.
building.
I think obviously the house is a whole nother animal in itself, but structurally, I don't think it's going to take too much, hopefully, to get that barn up and running again.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you on
I
that,
think it
Sarah.
would be nice to have a spreadsheet of what we're referring to. Like, are we talking about both barns, the cottage? There's obviously a shed that's up in the top field that's, a good windstorm's going to blow it down, but it doesn't necessarily have to be taken down. There are good bones to it. So I think it's good to just look at these things individually so that we can get going on it.
Okay. But to Joe's point, so we do agree to make a recommendation to the select board to set aside. We're going to have to ask for some sort of funding for a feasibility study in the event we need to go that route, just to have it set aside. To Joe's point, we don't have to use it, but just at least have it there.
And what, how much would be,
Go ahead, Amy.
how much would something like that generally cost? I don't have a sense of what the price tag is.
So I think it depends on if you're looking for structural integrity or what the use is. So obviously the house is very different, but we deal with this all the time. So.
Yeah. And that's something that I'm working to try to pull together. If we end up having a joint meeting, that might be able to be something that we just we're voting to recommend the concept, and then for that joint meeting, I'd have things to pull together because we'd be running out of time for the warrant anyway. So I just didn't have it pulled together for tonight. But I think by the time we have that joint, I'd have enough so that we could have that discussion.
Okay. All right. Okay. That sounds good. All right, so we'll update the action item calendar. We'll plan on our next meeting being the select board meeting on the 14th, unless anyone feels that we need to meet prior to then.
If something comes up, we can always schedule it.
Right. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Yep.
All right, good. All right, so no meeting until the 14th, when we present the RFP and the lease agreement to the select board. We'll circulate copies to the group prior to then, just so that everybody gets to take another look at the changes based on what we discussed tonight. And I think that concludes our meeting.
We're in good shape.
We're in good shape. Bye, Jenny. Thank you so much.
Good to see you guys. Bye.
Thanks, Jenny.
You want to make a motion to end the meeting?
Please.
So I move to make a motion to end the meeting at 8 p.m.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to end the meeting at 8 p.m. All those in favor, roll call vote.
I was like so excited.
No, I know.
Let's go.
Amy's like, right? Jen,
Aye, yep.
Sarah Seward,
Sarah Seward, aye.
Paul Glavy,
Aye.
and Cindy Napoli is aye. And that concludes our meeting for this evening. Thanks, everybody, for everything.
Yeah, Amy, you gotta get Amy in there.
Yeah.
Amy, you said aye, right? Amy?
Yeah.
Aye,
An
yeah.
overexcited eye.
Overexcited. She was first in.